Welcome back to the annual roundup of the year's best horror films. This is where, after a year of watching the latest new horror, I break down for you my 10 personal favourite watches of the year. And it's been an interesting year for sure. We've had a lot of familiar faces cropping up. There's been a lot of returning newer directors adding to their growing bodies of work. We've had definitely some big disappointments, such as for me, the director of Manfish, which was my favourite film of last year, following it up with this kind of underwhelming little sex comedy about cock-chopping witches. We lost Saw 11, unfortunately, which was the film that I was most looking forward to in 2024. It got pushed back to 2025.
Epic bad luck.
We had a crop of really ropey sequels, some predictably so, others really just shit in the bed big time. We had the wet fart revival of Hammer Horror with the Eddie Izzard Dr. Jekyll film, which wasn't terrible, but it really was not Hammer Horror.
Just go away.
We've had rubbish films made by the daughters of good directors, which, as Peter Capaldi says, kinda weird that that happened twice this year. The same with crappy spider films, 2 more than we actually needed in 2024. And then there was whatever the fuck that Crow film was. You could definitely argue we've had better years. And I was feeling a little bit down on 2024, I've got to be honest. But then, I finally cracked it. And for the last stretch of the year, got around to actually finding all of the really good stuff. And I think I've managed to knock together a list that I'm actually pretty proud of. For me, I think the trick this year, and it's maybe a broader theme in general, was that the reason that I think I was struggling for a while was simply just that I've realised I don't care for the big mainstream theatrically released American horror films. For me, it's really all about the weird and wonderful international stuff. And for the most part, that's what this list is going to be all about. So be prepared for some exotic picks. And I suppose this is the part where I've got to say, in a lot of cases, some of these international picks were released in their native countries last year, but have only had English language releases in 2024, which for me is the decider in terms of whether they count as 23 or 24 releases. So strap yourself in for another top 10 list of the most memorable films of the year. It's going to be an interesting one, I promise you that much.
It's time to spice things up a bit.
So, starting this list off, first up at number 10, we are going to go to France for some drugged up, high-octane, single-take zombie action with a film called Mads. So, this is yet another film that's doing the shot as a single take gimmick. We follow our lead Romain, sexy Romain, as he gets high, bumps into a zombie, goes off to a party, and then has his life very quickly spiral out of control, in what's basically one long extended anxiety attack of a film that starts off very, very small scale and ends up feeling absolutely massive by the time the end credits roll. The thing that I really like most about this film though, even though it's obviously been highly choreographed, is that it's a film that's full of these genuinely interesting, organic little character moments that feel very kind of real and improvised and unscripted. For me, when we get to the section of the film following the character of Anna, played by Laurie Pavey, you get a really raw, legitimately fresh performance that somehow manages to do new things with the body horror aspect of the transformation that she's undergoing. It's one of the strangest most unself-conscious performances I've ever seen, and it really just stands out as being totally unique and very, very memorable. And it's crazy to me that after all these decades, there's somehow still people out there that are able to make zombie films that somehow feel fresh and new and different. And that's exactly what Mads is, this huge, sweaty, breathless, drugged up plunge into terrifying, bloody insanity that really captures that coked up 3 o'clock in the morning, dusky, late summer vibe. If those nights ended with the world being overrun by zombies, of course. Which admittedly is sometimes what it can feel like. At number 9 on this list, we've got the only mainstream theatrically released American film to make it into my top 10, and believe it or not, it's M. Night Shyamalan's Trap. Yep, that's right, I really liked Trap. It's a film I've seen a lot of hate for online, which is nothing new for a Shyamalan film, but for me, I have always kind of been a Shyamalan defender, because I actually really admire his uncynical, ideas-driven approach to filmmaking. And Trap has got at least 2 things really going for it, that even people that don't particularly care for this film, I think, can agree on. Number 1, it's got a great central premise. A serial killer at a music concert realises he's stuck in the middle of a sting operation to capture him, and he's got to find a way to get out. And number 2, it's got a great central performance from Mr. Josh Hartnett as this charismatic psychopath who's constantly trying to stay one step ahead of the law whilst being a great dad to his rather implausibly sweet and charming daughter, whilst Shyamalan himself earns bonus dad points by casting his more talented daughter as the central pop star character, and she's actually really cool in this too. Now, you can argue about how well this film works out with that central premise and how much it kind of stretches credulity and loses its way, but I'm just a real sucker for films that follow smart characters constantly using their wits. Throw in the fact that the action is largely all bottled up in a single, clearly defined claustrophobic location, and I think you've got a solid setup for some sharp, intelligent storytelling, and high-stakes, fast-paced problem-solving under fire. For me, Trap is a compelling puzzle box of a film that's got enough charm, enough style, and enough charisma to carry over any rough patches in its enjoyably twisty thriller movie plotting. And plus, calling Hayley Mills' character Dr. Jo Josephine Grant? Yeah, Shyamalan, I got that reference.
Josephine Grant.
How do you do, Miss Grant?
So, back to France again for the number 8 film on this list, a film that did actually get a theatrical release in France at the end of last year, but which has only made it to English language territories this year, and it is a film called The Deep Dark. A bunch of miners take a professor down to investigate an ancient tomb that's buried in a mine, and they end up unearthing a curse in the form of an insanely cool-looking Lovecraftian god monster. I mean, come on, what's not to like about that? This is a film from director Matthew Turi, his third film after 2017's Hostile and 2021's enjoyably twisty Meander. And The Deep Dark, I think, definitely cements Turi as the master of claustrophobic horror. He's really somebody that's found something that works for him, a particular niche, if you will, and he's definitely playing to his strengths here with tight, single-location films with loads of atmosphere, very inventive camera work, and absolutely gorgeous production design. You really get a sense of this cramped, dirty, dingy mine being an actual character itself in this film, and it's such an interesting, scary location for a contained horror film that I'm surprised that it's not one that you see used much more often. Because even without an ancient skeletal General Grievous monster trying to tear you to pieces, mines are scary places. And for what's basically a pretty straightforward creature feature that's essentially a 1950s mummy's tomb story, only one that's set down in mine, this film really just does everything right. And what you get is just a great, tense, claustrophobic monster movie with probably the best practical creature design of any film this year. At number 7, last up for the final French film on this list, and I think it's safe to say it's been a pretty damn good year for French horror. And we have got The Soul Eater, from honestly probably one of my favourite directorial duos, Alexandre Bastillo and Julian Maury. What we've got here is just a really atmospheric, dark crime thriller about a series of brutal murders taking place in this beautiful, isolated mountain village. We follow a detective that's been assigned to the case who uncovers this old legend about the Soul Eater, which is a local superstition that, as it turns out, might be more than just a simple story. Now, this is more of a crime film that then sort of goes into horror territory as it goes on, but it's definitely one of the darkest and most violent films on this list, and it goes into some really fucked up, disturbing territory for sure. It's got this constant atmosphere where it feels like violence could erupt at any moment, and there's plenty of memorably sick, twisted murders in this one, including a breakfast table bloodbath scene that's as brutal as you would expect from the guys that brought us inside. And plus, there's also an added twist to this one that I think really kind of levels up the extreme nastiness in this one that is very French, but very awesome, and is responsible, I think, for one of my personal favourite lines of dialogue this entire year.
Le couple a eu un orgasme au moment de se tuer.
Extra points too for some really amazing locations. The atmosphere of this quiet little mountain village I think really adds to the sense that we're somewhere where weird and terrifying things can happen. There's a great brooding soundtrack too, and it's another film that I think benefits massively from taking itself very seriously, ditching any attempts at humour or self-referentiality, and just going for the really creepy, skin-crawlingly fucked up stuff whenever it gets the chance. With Alexandre Maury and Julian Bastillo, you know you're in the hands of directors who take no prisoners. And that's why I think The Soul Eater is such a fantastically savage, bleak journey into hell on earth. More great stuff from two really talented French motherfuckers. At number 6 on this list, we're going to go to South Korea this time for a great little psychological horror effort by the name of Sleep, a film that showed up in festivals in 2023 before it then got its wider English language release in, of course, 2024. Now, Sleep is one of those films that takes a very simple premise, it strips away all of the bells and whistles, and just delivers a really tight, well-written series of twists and turns around that idea. And the question that runs throughout this whole film is, what if the person that you loved most suddenly became a danger to you? I think what works so well about Sleep is that it's a beautifully written little film that starts off with a really sweet, charming, likeable couple, which, I've got to be honest, seemed to be a rare thing this year. This was a year of just absolutely loathsome leads for the most part. And then it slowly introduces a threat into their relationship that builds and builds over the course of the film as we see that relationship tested to its breaking point. At its most intense moments, and make no mistake, this is an intense little film, Sleep manages to work itself up into a fever pitch of kind of who can you trust paranoia and anxiety that I think almost rivals Shinya Tsukamoto's Kotoko, where suddenly everything in Sujin's life has become a deadly danger. And without spoiling things, let's just say, with a load of really creepy moments that get under your skin very subtly, that play on that idea of somebody close to you suddenly not being the person that you think they are, Sleep is definitely a horror film, it's definitely legitimately scary in the true sense of the word, but it plays really, really nicely and intelligently with the idea of ambiguities. That by the time you get to the end, everything that you've seen is entirely readable in at least 2 different ways, without ever feeling like it's cheating you one way or the other. And I think that's a very skillful thing to pull off, especially when both explanations, in this case, are entirely satisfactory in themselves. Sleep is just a joyfully simple little character piece from a very talented first-time writer-director that gets really smart, efficient scares out of tiny little intimate moments of domestic horror and actually delivers a film that works emotionally because of how well drawn its central characters are and how much you actually believe in and want that central relationship to work out. I liked it a lot. Breaking into the top 5 of the year, we're going to move to Japan now for a film that was released a while back but which got its English region release earlier in 2024, and that film is The House of the Serpent from director Hiroshi Takahashi, who's probably best known for being the writer of 1998's original Ring, although he's actually also quite a decent horror director in his own right. This is a film that again is about a small cast of characters trapped in a single location. Very much a theme this year it seems, these are just the sort of films that I particularly gravitate towards the most. But the setup here is that we've got a writer-director who contacts a friend of hers to come out to her house, whereupon, as they work their way through a script that she's been struggling with, they find themselves besieged by supernatural forces, with predictably strange results. If you really like films that are centred on multi-layered, psychosexually charged relationships between really interesting female characters trapped in a single location, working through their personal problems under very intense claustrophobic circumstances, we're talking stuff like Clouds of Sils Maria, The Duke of Burgundy, Singapore Sling, Braid, then chances are you're going to love House of the Serpent. It's a film that succeeds largely due to the performances of its 2 lead actresses, Tomomi Kuno and Shoko Nakahari. Shoko Nakahari is probably someone you'll be familiar with if you've seen a lot of great Japanese genre stuff. She's got a fantastic track record, and for me, her performance here in this film is, I think, one of the best of the entire year, easily one of the most ambitious, because it's a part that requires playing a lot of different aspects to the one character, the kind of role that's really just a dream part for a fantastic actress like Shoko Nakahari. And whilst this is a film that could easily have come across as being talky, sort of stage playish, because it really is just mainly all talking in rooms, the whole film still manages to be really cinematic all the way through. It's a film that's driven by its dialogue and its characterisation, but it's also constantly playing mind games with you. You never really know in any given scene whether you're watching a flashback, a conversation with a spirit that's possessing somebody else's body, a fictional sequence with characters reading dialogue from the pages of a script, or sometimes even an actual genuine conversation. It's very head-trippy, very surreal and very deliberately disorientating, and I personally just love films like this that shamelessly mess with your head in really kind of creepy, interesting ways, and really ask you to pay attention and question everything that you're being told. Part exorcist film, part haunted house, part psychosexual thriller, part character-driven chamber piece, part kinky power play, and part mind-bending nightmare, House of the Serpent is really another hidden gem of the year for me. The kind of film that's just endlessly rewatchable, because like all gems, it's got so many different facets to it that you're always going to see something new every time you come to a film like this. Well, we're going to be staying in Japan for the number 4 pick of the year from one of Japan's most prolific directors, and we have got Lumberjack the Monster from the ever-surprising Takashi Miike, the director of course, Audition, One Missed Call, Lesson of Evil, Ichi the Killer, and literally over 100 other films besides. This was another film, came out in Japan in 2023, then it got its Netflix release this year for the English-speaking world. And kinda similar to The Soul Eater, it's again a crime thriller that's got strong horror elements to it. Specifically, in this case, a brutal masked serial killer who's going around smashing in people's skulls and stealing their brains. This is Miike at his most stylish and efficient, with an actual decent budget and a script that keeps him focused on action and dramatic moments of character conflict. His lead actor Kazuya Kamanashi, who plays Akira, is just a fascinatingly complex anti-hero. He's really, I think, the ultimate Miike lead. Just this unstoppably compelling ball of kind of ruthless, sexy charisma that oozes that kind of bad boy attitude and swagger, even as he's doing incredibly nasty things. And the things that I think work the best about this film are its discussions on morality and ethics that run all the way through this film and give all of its many undeniably horrific set pieces a solid philosophical underpinning. Set pieces that include a really nightmarish horror house opening flashback scene and a bloody final showdown that shows just how committed Miike is to the unpredictability of his character's actions. There is an argument to be made that Lumberjack is kind of borderline horror at best. In fact, it actually even includes its fair share of sci-fi elements, believe it or not. And I think really what that comes down to is the fact that a lot of Japanese stuff in particular doesn't necessarily look at genre as being anywhere near the sort of rigid thing that we see it as in the West. There isn't necessarily that same strict demarcation of what is and what isn't horror. For me, I think it's just the level of brutality, the violence, and just the constant horrific imagery and ideas in Lumberjack that definitely earn its place on this list. It's just really too fucked up to not think of it as a horror film. At number 3 on this list, we have got something very special indeed. It is, by definition, the film that I've been looking forward to the most that got its release this year. Now, how is that something that I'm able to quantify? Well, because this is a film that's been sitting on a shelf for over 10 years now before finally getting its official release, courtesy of the top tier mad lads over at Unearthed Films, which means we are indeed talking about The Profane Exhibit. Yes, this is officially, look at the copyright date in the credits, a 2024 release, even though the majority of this film was actually completed as far back as 2013. But it's never actually had a legitimate release until now, and after 10 plus years of hype, I'm here to tell you that it has indeed been worth the wait, because this film is fantastic. Now, The Profane Exhibit, if you've missed out on the 10 years of hype leading up to this film's release, was originally conceived as being the kind of ultimate extreme underground anthology film. It would bring together a smorgasbord of 10 top-notch indie auteurs, splattermeisters, and boundary pushers from all around the globe. And the amazing thing is, considering how disparate the pool of directing talent is for this film, you'd expect a mixed bag, especially with that many directors. No, I actually think this might be the most consistently good multi-director anthology film that I have ever seen. Every single segment in this is memorable and actually feels like its own short film in itself, with a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's that rare anthology where it actually feels like you've got all of these well-known directors together and they're actually all turning in some of their best work. For one, there's a brilliant segment from a guy called Yoshihiro Nishimura, one of my personal favourite directors of all time. He's the absolutely unique visionary responsible for the amazing Tokyo Gore Police and a ton of other mad Japanese splatterfests beside. It's a short that even reunites him with the equally amazing Ei Shina, his Tokyo Gore Police leading lady. Nishimura's segment in this is an absolute highlight. So weirdly is, and this isn't a name you necessarily would associate with quality, but it's Uwe Boll's Basement segment, which features another all-timer for me, Caroline Williams, my personal favourite actress currently working in the genre today. But actually the top prize in this film for me, for the segment that just absolutely blew me away, has got to go to a short from a very controversial German director by the name of Marian Dora. If you know the name, you'll know what I mean. But his short, Mors in Tabula, if I was to take each of these segments as films in their own right and rank them each separately, is the best horror that I have seen all year. I actually think it's even better than my number one pick on this list just individually by itself. I think it's haunting, it's beautiful, it's terrifying, and it is just absolutely fucking incredible. It's a 10 out of 10 short, I think, in a film that's really only got one segment that I'd consider to be below average, which really is an unbelievably good success rate, especially for a 10 director effort like this. To finally get a chance to actually see The Profane Exhibit, after having heard so much about it, after having waited for so long, really is just one of the most memorable moments of the year for me. It is something that's really special. And the bittersweet thing about it, about seeing how good the final product actually is realising that not everybody involved in the making of this film is still around to see its final release. Alongside Maki Mizui from Nishimura's segment, directors Ryan Nicholson and Ruggero Deodato have both sadly passed away since filming their segments, meaning that The Profane Exhibit is to be their final artistic statement made from beyond the grave. For the number 2 film on this list, we're travelling to Spain for Carlota Pereda's The Chapel. Here on this channel, I'm a big fan of Spanish horror films, especially modern Spanish horror, and The Chapel is more quality Spanish stuff. This lovely supernatural fairy tale about a young girl trying to communicate with the spirits of the dead so that she can find a way to keep in touch with her dying mother after she's gone. There's also a cynical medium with a dark past, played by Spanish genre legend Belén Rueda, the star of wonderful Spanish films like The Orphanage, Julia's Eyes, Phenomena, The Body, and a lot more. As far as I'm concerned, Belén Rueda is somebody that doesn't get nearly enough love from the horror community, because any time that you see her name in the credits of a film, it's pretty much a guarantee that you're going to be in for something exceptional. An actress with a more solid body of work in the last 20 years you'd really be hard pushed to find. But I actually think she's upstaged in this film by the performance of young Maya Zataigi as Emma, the young girl who gives what I consider to be the best performance of 2024. Layered, confident, sweet, sad, and just really impossible not to be moved by. She's definitely the absolute heart of this film, and it's a film about a search for hope and love in the face of horrible tragedy, and how important it is to never give up on the people that matter. For me, this is just a really lovely modern ghost story. It's fantastic to look at, it's beautifully and intelligently structured around these mirroring flashback scenes that parallel the two characters' lives and motivations, and it's heartbreaking, it's emotional, and it's very, very effective. And yet more proof of just how much great stuff there is coming out of Spain these days. Which brings us to our number 1 film on this list, which is also a Spanish film. And it's one that's both a huge surprise and at the same time not really that much of a surprise at all, in that it's a film that I personally was actually really looking forward to, because it's actually a sequel to a film that, when it came out, was my personal favourite film of 2020. But it was also one of those cases where I had that feeling of, did we really need a sequel to that film? And considering how good that sequel turned out to be, the answer is, sure, why not? Because my number one film of 2024 is The Platform 2. Yes, The Platform 2, a sequel to one of the smartest, most original sci-fi horror films out there, once again helmed by the returning director Mr. Galder Gaztelu Urrutia, proving that he is not just a one-hit wonder. Now, I loved Platform 2, I think in part for some of the same reasons why I loved Part 1. It's fascinating, intelligent, high-concept filmmaking, a savage political parable that's loaded with ingeniously simple concepts and very compelling, complex characters. But there's more to it than that. Platform 2 is not just a great film, it's also a great sequel. It picks up right after the events of the first film. It expects you to know everything about the setup and the world from the get-go, and it immediately starts deconstructing the rules of the first film, developing and expanding on its ideas in order to do really interesting new things that both work and are consistent, and that feel completely fresh at the same time. This isn't just one of those sequels that feels like a tired copy-pasting of the same story over again. In fact, if anything, Platform 2's status as a sequel really kind of frees it up to be a much more ambitious film than Part 1. Part 2 is less about trying something new, as it is about trying everything that it possibly can, whilst the level of threat and brutality that you get in this film is constant, right from the very first scene. It creates very much a world that feels a lot more dangerous, more violent, and much scarier than the world of the first film. I think if Platform 1 was this utopian political experiment that you watched slowly disintegrate, Platform 2 reinvents things as a tense, high-stakes war film, with characters struggling to survive a harsh climate where resistance of any kind is swiftly and brutally punished. And whilst the pace is a lot faster, Platform 2 still manages to be a beautiful film. I mean, just all round, I really loved the Platform 2. Now, how does it compare to the first film? Well, they're two of my favourite films of the last 5 years, and I think that they actually complement each other really well. They're both very different, yet they both sort of click together really nicely. They both do their own things and do them really well. Platform 2, I think, is both a great film and a great sequel. And for me, in a year when quite a lot of the seemingly surefire hits ended up being somewhat disappointing, I think it's quite the achievement for Galder Gaztelu Urrutia to have added another notch to his belt with another absolute banger. I'm just so excited to see what this guy does next, because he's on, I think, a perfect run so far as I'm concerned. He makes the kind of smart, unique, layered, brutal, but beautiful films that just win me over every single time. So, with that said, I think that should wrap things up for this massive list of the films that I loved in 2024. Another one's done, another year over, and hopefully there'll be more Morbid Madness to come next year. So join us for that as and when it happens. Thank you everybody for joining me. I hope you've enjoyed my list, because I always enjoy making these. And we shall see you all again in the grand old year of 2025.